Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan Smith, and I'm answering your questions around training and physical preparation for hiking. Now, essentially, if you haven't watched these streams before, basically I will be answering any live questions that do come through these chats as we come through. If anyone posts anything up, I'm more than happy to chat. Beyond that, I have a few questions that have been sent through to me prior, which I'm going to be covering in a little bit of detail. So, what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be talking a little bit about zone 2 training for female hikers. We're going to be talking a little bit about arch pain and specifically for people who get a bit of foot pain and who have high arches. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about the heart rate and if there's sort of more acceptable heart rate levels that you should be having while you hike. Now, before I get into all of that, just a quick announcement if you haven't seen already. On Monday, I am going to be releasing a brand new mini course to help with breathing going up hills. Now, this is a cool little course which is going to be focusing on some really fundamental, very, very basic, but very, very effective breathing drills, which will ultimately help improve your breathing control and comfort when you're climbing up steep ascents, which is probably one of the most common issues I hear from hikers on a daily basis. Now, this mini course is going to be completely free. It's going to be released on Monday. I'm going to do a big announcement once it's released. If anyone does want to be set up like right away as soon as it kind of comes out, if you just want to flick me an email or message or whatever it may be, then I can just put you on a little pre-sale list so we will get you set up or reach out to you immediately when it's released. Um, Now, I know previously in these streams I was talking about another breathing course, which is about strength training for breathing and respiratory muscle training for breathing. That is set to be released in July sometime, and that gets a little bit more advanced. But I thought it'd be worthwhile releasing this basic one early on before we get into things. So if anyone wants to check it out, you can sort of go from there. Now, coming up, let's get into the first question. And I had this sent through to me the other day, and basically, someone sent me through a reel on Instagram. And pretty much they were sort of, it was a reel from Stacey Sims, which if you haven't come across before, is a big influencer or a well-known coach for women's fitness and women's health. And basically the reel was sort of said, hey, zone 2 training is not very effective for women compared to men. Is that true? Now, for context, zone 2 training. I don't often use this terminology. I don't talk about a huge amount, but zone 2 training is essentially just low intensity cardio. So, in the hiking context, I often talk about doing certain training at nose breathing pace or lower intensity. And zone 2 training is pretty much the same thing. And this is essentially when we're looking at walking, hiking, you might do these cycling sessions, you may be doing stair or hill climbing at a really like controlled intensity. That sort of zone 2 training. And this is something that I always tell hikers to prioritize, and we will sort of see. It's something that's always going to be a basis for the hiking training program. However, situation where Stacey Sims, who's a very, very, very big following, puts out a lot of great stuff. She's a great coach. But this reel basically was talking about this. She is a very, very big influencer. She is a very great coach, and I've got great things to say about her training, but it gets a little bit tricky in this context. Essentially, in this reel, as a quote of what she sort of says, is the benefits of zone 2 training, when you look at it, are there are benefits for men. Maybe this isn't a quote, I wrote this down wrong, but basically said there are benefits of zone 2 training when you look at it for men. But for women, there aren't so many. Essentially, in this reel, she sort of says, hey, for women, they don't really improve what's called mitochondrial density from zone 2 work, which is one of the major reasons why we want to do this long cardio to increase the mitochondria in the body so we can produce energy for longer periods of time. And in the reel, she says the main benefits of zone 2 stuff is going to be stress relief and getting out of fresh air. And that's kind of the reel. Now, from there, I was like, oh, you know what, that's interesting. I'm curious why she's kind of going down that route. So I kind of went onto her website. I sort of read the sort of article which she put together with it, which explains her kind of reasoning a little bit. Now, I know a lot of my following, and I know a lot of my hikers follow this and have probably seen a similar reel, and I think this is really, really important to talk about. Because there are a few problems when it comes down to this, and it just sounds like a bit of a catchphrase. It sounds quite catchy and it's quite impactful when you see it in a short 90-second reel or whatever. But a few problems. Number one, when it comes down to this, and a lot of the stuff you will see online, this is talking to the general population for general health, for general fitness, and general longevity. This is not talking about you as a hiker. This is not talking about you as an endurance athlete. This is just a very generalized statement. On top of that, pretty much any time we are looking at a reel, which is like 90 seconds or whatever it may be, there is obviously going to be missing context to the full conversation. And I think there was a larger conversation around this on the podcast or whatever it may be. But, diving into the specific subject is, I did look into it a little bit and I kind of read her articles talking about all this. And she says this statement very much with a very confident. It's like, this is it. And, I'm, yada, yada, yada. But in all honesty, the science that she provides, at least, and that I've looked in this particular situation, it is a little bit debatable. Because in her article, she sort of quoted a study that sort of says low intensity training doesn't increase mitochondria density for women, but this specific study didn't really look at zone 2 training. It was looking at another type of training which may be similar, but it can't be really the same. So that was a bit odd. Also in the article, they included like, a quote from a scientific journal, which read physical activity is essential for males to maintain mitochondrial integrity in conjunction with more coupled respiration like females, even though their bioenergetic capabilities may remain lower than females. And when you read the article, it makes a little bit more sense. And basically, like, oh, kind of that's pretty powerful. But it's just a quote from a journal. I went and actually looked at the journal, and the study wasn't even a human study. It was a study on mice, which they kind of conveniently left out of that situation. And there's nothing wrong with using mice studies. Like, there's definitely a part of sports science and all of that, but it's not something we can use to make a definitive statement. And the more glaring thing is basically, as much as there was a study here and there's information here, there is actually a big scientific review on this very, very much subject, which is a little bit in contradiction. And I was sort of had to read through this review, which basically doesn't look at one research article, but this looked at a total of 353 different research articles, which were looking at changes in mitochondrial content. And it looked at all of these and it kind of like picked out, ones that were maybe not great studies, and it looked at this and looked at the broader context, which when it comes down to science and sports science, that's kind of what I want to look at. Because we can find a single study saying anything, debating anything pretty much, doesn't really count. We want to be looking at the broader context and the body of evidence. And according to this review, they were looking at 353. They didn't really seem like there was many influences for this mitochondrial change in regards to age, in regards to sex, in regards to menopause, disease, or the mass engaged. There were different factors which affected mitochondria development and mitochondria changes, but they didn't really see a change. So it's a bit odd that someone's saying, hey, this doesn't work for women, but there's a big review of studies saying not that really big difference. And basically it sort of said, look, all different training intensities did see an increase of things. So steady state, like zone 2 stuff, high intensity interval training and sprint training, which Stacey Sims is talking about specifically, and they're all improving. So yeah, there's a little bit debatable. But even beyond all of that, beyond the science, pretty much the most important thing that you need to keep in mind as a hiker when we are looking at this type of stuff online is when you're looking at these situations and any online content, you need to ask yourself, is this source of information talking about my particular situation? Because ultimately, as a hiker, you may have characteristics that make you up as a hiker. You may be a female, you may be male, you may be 50 plus years, you may be lower years, you may be a retired athlete, you may be never training your life, whatever it may be. But ultimately, as a hiker, one thing you all have in common is you are ultimately an endurance athlete. Even though you may not be racing, even though whatever it may be, you fall into the endurance category. And the thing about training for endurance sports, which hiking falls into, it is not the same as training for general health. There is some crossover, but they have slight differences and slight different outcomes we want to achieve. On top of that, is training for endurance sports is not the same as training for body composition change, weight loss, or muscle gain. And probably 98% of the information you find online, and particularly the big influencers or the big, well-popular coaches, they're kind of more talking towards the general population. They're not talking towards endurance sports, but they're talking about this. So what may be right for one context may not be right for the other. And then you can take a step back again and instead of saying, you know what, even if, the absolute science is absolutely indisputable that women don't gain as much from zone 2 training, which, as we went through before, bit of a question mark on that, and I wouldn't really say that. Ultimately, you as a hiker, in the practical situation, you need to prepare for hours and hours of hiking. And there's no escaping this. And no amount of sprint training of doing really, really high intensity stuff is going to replicate that. And it comes down, it is kind of common sense. So Takeaway from all of this is there are millions and millions and millions of opinions out there. Some good, some not so bad. Some people have great opinions about 95% of the stuff, and then they say some weird stuff for some reason. It's very, very odd. But just keep in mind, you're a hiker. Look at it through that context. Does it make sense in your situation? And ultimately, if you ever look at something like this, you get a reel, you get an article, and you're like, does this really apply to me? Or someone's made this big claim about this being good or this not being good, and I'm not really sure. Feel free to send it over to me. I'm happy to have a look at things and see in the broader context if it makes sense. I'm happy to kind of have a look and say, okay, someone's quoted this study, but there are other studies out there which maybe go the other way. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help on that. So hopefully that clears things up a little bit on that. So, next question, and this got sent through the other day, is we're talking a little bit about arch pain. And the question was, I went out on a hike, which was just under 7.5 miles, and the arches on my feet have been a little bit sore. Last time my arches felt sore, I bought insoles for high arch support, and my feet have felt fine after hikes, except for this most recent one. Then the question was, anyone else have high arches? What kind of support do you use? Any way to help with the soreness, or do I need foot strengthening exercises? So there's a little bit that goes into this answer because more often than not, when it comes down to pain, it's not just one little magic fix. We want to have a bit of a broader context. So I'm going to explain a few bits and pieces. So we're going to be talking through exploring the cause of pain. We're going to talk about a little bit about relieving soreness, training, and training on that. So essentially, when it comes down to sore feet, it's a massive factor for so many people, whether you have eye arches or not, or whatever it may be. At the very, very, very top level, first thing a lot of people lean to, and it's definitely very, very important. At the top level, finding the right footwear and the right support, which works for you, is always going to be valuable. Because if you're wearing shoes that don't support you, if you're wearing footwear that doesn't feel good for you, that's not great. So this can obviously take a little bit of trial and error. However, it does take a bit of trial and error. And even if you get the absolute perfect footwear for you, there is still risk factors when it comes down to pain, which I'll go into in a moment. Now, if you're in the situation, if you are trying to figure out your footwear, if you've got feet, you've got different support levels, and you just can't figure this out for yourself, maybe you tried a couple of different pairs of footwear, maybe you've tried different supports and it's just not right, then I would strongly recommend just seeing a podiatrist and seeing if you can book in with someone. It may have a monetary investment, but you can literally go in and say, hey, can you look at my feet? Can you recommend some shoes for my hiking, which may help here? Or you can bring in your shoes and say, hey, are these good for me? Or these supports good for me? Or whatever it may be. It's definitely a worthwhile investment. And ultimately, what you want to get yourself to the stage is where find footwear, which is kind of mostly comfortable. And if you are in this situation, in this particular question, where we're like, hey, I found some, it's been feeling good, and it's been feeling fine after hikes, except for this more recent one, well, usually that kind of puts a little bit of highlight saying maybe footwear isn't the problem here. Because if you found something that works for you, it has been working for the most of the time, and then something's changed, probably not the footwear. The biggest factor when it comes down to pain, whether it's arch pain, whether it's high heel pain, whether meta may be, or any type of pain at all, the biggest factor we want to consider is a sudden increase in what we call load through the feet. So essentially a sudden increase in the amount of stress that your feet take in a certain situation. Now, in the hiking context, this can come in a lot of different ways when we're looking at hike to hike to hike, week to week to week, or whatever it may be. Now, this can come from a big increase in hiking distance. Like if your recent hikes have been feeling fine, you've been doing, say, 10-kilometer hikes, and then this recent hike you went out and did it was like 13 or 14 or 15 kilometers, and it was a big jump up in distance, the body may not, the feet not being used to that or ready for that. That increased a big jump in load, and that can lead to pain. Very, very simple. Or maybe increasing hiking difficulty in the sense that maybe you were doing the same amount of distance or the same amount of time, but all of a sudden we got way more elevation and our feet just took a pounding from lots and lots of descents. That could be a factor. Another factor that often trips people up is an increase in hiking speed. So this can often happen if we're out with a friend who's a little bit of a quicker hiker, and we have to keep up with them. And when we're pushing the pace and the speed, puts a lot of extra pressure through the feet. Or this can also happen when we're doing slightly flatter hikes. So maybe you've been doing lots of hikes with lots of elevation, and this last hike you had a hike that was pretty flat, and unconsciously I was just going quicker and quicker and quicker than I'm quite used to. Another factor might be an increase in pack weight, and you're carrying 5 kilos, 5 kilos, cut 5 kilos, all of a sudden have 7 kilos. Maybe it's been a significant break since your last hike, and maybe the last hikes were fine, but then you had 3 or 4 or 5 weeks off, and the body just took a little bit of detraining effect. It didn't, it forgot, in quotation marks, a little bit about the stresses of hiking and just jump back into it. Or maybe just introduce some challenging terrain you haven't done in a while. Maybe this last hike had lots of really rough terrain, so the feet were doing a lot of what? So all of these factors, this is the type of stuff that we want to look at. And more than likely, something in there is usually the contributor to this type of flare up of discomfort. If things have been going smoothly, something would have changed. On the flip side, these are all things that will increase the spike in load. There are other factors which can actually affect the body's ability to tolerate load. Um, and essentially, what it can do is it actually lower our tolerance. So therefore, even if there hasn't been massive changes here, the body just can't handle the certain demands. So, for example, sleep. If you didn't have a huge amount of sleep in the week prior or a couple of nights prior, the body may be a little bit more receptive to discomfort. Stress. If you're going through a super high stress period, that can affect things. Fatigue. If you were out on the trail and you were getting tired, maybe your nutrition wasn't right or whatever it may be. Or maybe during the week you actually did a bit more training than usual. That can affect it. Your mood, literally what's going in your mood and your head and your thoughts can affect the presentation of pain. And even the weather. So obviously, depending on where you are in the world, the weather can affect things as well. 95% of the time, if we do a little bit of detective work and think about, okay, all the different things that may have contributed, something in here, maybe one or two or whatever it may be, may have contributed. Now, obviously, that takes a little bit of thought. Obviously, that takes a little bit of detective work, and sometimes it can be really difficult to think back and say, "How was my sleep? I can't even remember 3 nights ago what was going on." And as you can kind of see, with all of this going on, this is one of the reasons why pain can be such a tricky thing, because it is so easy to sometimes say, "Okay, I got in pain because of my footwear," but maybe the footwear's all good, and you're like, well, there's all this stuff and stuff. So, definitely food for thought. So, first place to look at is if you did have this flare up, have a think about all that, see if there's anything there that jumps out. Now, next up, let's talk about relieving soreness. If it is still uncomfortable, if it is still sore, first place to look is just a bit of rest. It can be hard to rest the feet, obviously, because we're on that, we're walking around, go to work, and this and that. Um, give it a bit of rest, give it a few days, more than likely it'll kind of settle. While it is a little bit tender and that is a little bit inflamed or whatever it may be, a little bit of massage in the muscles above and below can often help. So if you've got pain in the arches, just getting a little bit of massage with your thumbs or with a ball, not so much on the arches, but maybe on the heel, maybe on the forefoot, maybe up the calf, that can often help. Once it's kind of on the way down and it's not like really angry, it's not really uncomfortable, but it's a little bit more settled, then you can start applying a little bit of gentle massage on the arches themselves, again with your thumbs or a ball or something like that. That can be quite good. And if it is really, really sore, I don't think, like from the question, it sounds like it's super inflamed or super uncomfortable. But if it is quite sore, you can, one thing can be quite nice, like contrast therapy, where you apply cold for a couple of minutes and you apply hot for a couple of minutes and repeat that a bunch of times. That can be quite nice. Or even getting a bit of strapping. If you just go into Google, like how to strap my feet for sore arches, it'll pop up videos and that can often help. So relieving soreness is it's pretty gentle. It's pretty simple. It's just giving that area space to recover and be quite nice to it. And then next up, thinking about training. So when it comes down to training, foot training itself, it can get very, very complicated. It is one of those subjects where a lot of coaches out there a lot of people worry about their feet. A lot of people struggle with foot pain, and a lot of coaches out there kind of make the most of that, I would sort of say. And there's a lot of coaches out there that talk about foot pain and this and that, and they get very, very complicated with this. They do all this fancy stuff, and some of it's good, some of it's not so good, in all honesty. And in all honesty, my personal opinion when it comes down to this is for hikers who struggle with their feet, for 95% of people out there, if you can apply the basics of training consistently and you can progress it over time, this is kind of all you need. Unfortunately, the basics of foot strengthening is a bit boring. Unfortunately, the basics of foot strengthening does take time to apply. But I would sort of say, I've talked to hikers, so many hikers over the years who struggle with pain. And I always ask them, what have you done in the past to help with? And they'll list off all of these things. I'm like, okay, how long have you done that for? And they're like, oh, I did a couple of weeks and I got bored and I pick it up when I'm sore and this and that. But no one really applies it consistently. So before we even get complicated, nailing the basics is kind of what we want to do. Now, basics, very, very, very simple. And I talk about this stuff all the time. Number one for improving your foot pain, building up tolerance, is strengthening up your calves. Now, the calves, lower muscles just below the knees, very, very, very important for strengthening up, for helping support the feet. If the calves are stronger, that will take pressure out of the feet. Very simple. On top of that, even though we're talking about before, hey, how do I strengthen up my arches? If we do calf raises and we do them right, that will indirectly strengthen up the arches as well. Not only are we working the calves, but we're loading up different tissues, we're loading up things and bits and pieces. It will work. So essentially, calf strengthening, it is a bit boring. It is a bit dull, and this is why a lot of people just don't stick with it, but very, very, very important. Now, when we're looking at calf strengthening, how I like to approach it is getting a combination of both straight leg calf raises and bent leg calf raises. Now, straight leg calf raises is kind of something similar to this, where you've probably done this before, where this is a version and an eccentric calf raise version. But basically, a strength leg calf raise is just having your leg straight and pushing up and then coming down. You can do this 2 legs at a time, 1 leg at a time, or something like this, which in between. The idea behind this is this particular exercise is working what's called, well, predominantly working what's called the gastrocnemius, so this sort of higher muscle in the calf. We're loading that up and getting it through. And if we can be very controlled with this, we can load this up. Not only is it going to do that, but the archers are going to get a decent workout as well, which can be very beneficial. So let me share that in the chat as we're going through. Now, I also like to complement, the calf stuff. That one, the straight leg calf raise is great. The next one we kind of want to pair it with is like some type of bent leg version, where essentially we're doing a very similar thing, but what we're doing is we've got our knees at a bit of a bend here. Now, the idea behind this is when we've got a bent leg version, this is going to bias the slower muscle of the calf, what's called the soleus. It's going to do that a little bit more. Yes, it is still going to work the muscle up here, but it's going to bias that lower muscle a little bit more. Again, with this one, you can do a double leg, you can do a single leg, you do it off the floor, you can do it with a weight. There's a bunch of different ways of going about it. But again, this is going to be really good for the calves, really good for the feet. And I'll pop that in chat. Now, as with any type of strength training, when we're looking at this, we want to progress over time. Not only do we want to be consistent with it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks to slowly build up, but we want to progress over time. We want to make sure it gets a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, and just not doing the same thing. So that's first thing. And I'll tell you what, if you just nail that one thing, it will probably sort you out. Or not sort you out, but it'll take you a long way. Most people don't tend to stick with this. Most people don't tend to progress it, and they end up doing the same thing, but that's definitely worthwhile looking at. Now, the other thing you definitely want to think about is, okay, another thing that can help the archers is just getting regular exposure to relevant hiking stresses. What I mean by that is when we're hiking, obviously we'll hike every week or every couple of weeks or whatever it may be, the feet will get challenged in certain ways. What we can do to expose the feet to these challenges in our actual training, so it can adapt, so they can get stronger, they can get more tolerant, and therefore it won't be as affected hiking. So one really simple way of going about it, load of pack walking, whacking on a pack, walking around for 30 minutes to 60 minutes around the local area. This is really, really useful because it exposes the body to that pack weight, exposes the feet to that pack weight, and can be really useful. The benefit of this as well, because it's short, you can overload this pack. You can get it a little bit heavier, a little bit heavier, a little bit heavier than you would do on your hiking, and therefore help the feet adapt to that. So when you're on the trail with your normal pack weight, it can be a little bit better. Or tempo walking. As I said before, hiking speed can be a trigger for this. So if you're aware that, okay, when I do hike quicker, my feet get sore, maybe expose your body to that in the training. Tempo walking is just, again, doing a 30, 40, 60-minute walk, going periods of a minute quick, a minute slow, a minute quick, a minute slow, just alternating those speeds so the feet can get exposed to that. Or maybe stair and hill climbing, like getting that in your week. So you're getting exposed to going up and down, teaching the calves, teaching the feet to get used to that, or whatever it is. In all honesty, if you can nail these basics, and that just should go into any normal hiking training program, that will go a long way. Now, if you are already confident you're doing all of this, and you're like, hey, I'm doing this stuff, I've been consistent with it, I've been progressing over time, then you may consider the next level of things. Then you may consider, like, okay, what can I do to kind of directly target the feet? As I said, this will target the feet a lot, but if you're already doing it and you need a little bit more, that's when we go into the specific stuff. I wouldn't say most people need to do specific foot training because it can be very time consuming and you can get a lot of benefits from the basics, but this is the next step. Now, there are 1,000,001 different exercises out there for foot strengthening. Some are good, some are not, or whatever it may be. What I quite like, if you're going down that route, is I've got a few really, really simple foot-specific drills, which I'll share. Basically, it's a sequence of 4 different exercises which you're going to do, which you can do at home. You can do like, in the gym, whatever it may be. Kind of want to do this barefoot. And if you kind of tick off each of these, they can cover a lot of bases for the feet. Now, the first drill, really, really simple. Once I come into view, what we're doing, heel up, or heel on the ground, feet up, and you're literally just walking back and then walking forward. What you may look at is doing about 20 steps forward, 20 steps back. And the idea behind this is we've got a little bit of control through the feet, working the front of the shins, works out pretty well. Very, very simple. Now, number two you would pair with that is foot strength drill number two, very fancy name. In this one, what we're doing is we're rolling the feet out. We're pulling the big toe off and we're rolling onto the sides of our arches and locking that in. And then we're doing a very, very similar thing, literally stepping forward, 20 steps forward, 20 steps back. Again, we want to do this barefoot and as we go through. So this is just strengthening the feet in a different angle, stressing the arches in a different way. That's the next step. Let me pop that in chat. Next one, foot strength number three, is kind of going the other way. So this time we roll our feet inwards. So the outsides of our feet is off and we're kind of rolling in. And again, 20 steps forward, 20 steps back. And we go through with this. This one is a bit awkward for me. Like I can't really do this very well, but this is the next step. So it's just hitting another angle. And then number four is foot strength number four, creative names. This is up here to tippy toes and you're doing these little up and down, up and down. As you can see, I'm not very good at this particular drill. You can kind of hold on to something if you need as you're going through it. But this one, again, it's just challenging the feet, challenging the lower limbs in a slightly different way. I kind of like this sequence. I got taught this quite a few years ago, and I feel like it covers a lot of your bases. And you can basically throw this into your warm-ups as part of your strength training and just do 20 reps of each of those a couple of times. You can do them at the end of the workout, or you can just do them as separate sessions or whatever. And that works out pretty well. I think that kind of covers most of your bases. It's pretty time efficient. Alternatively, another thing you can kind of do is like doing like a towel scrunch, which you've ever come across before. Um, uh, arch. Here we go. This. I think it's, yeah. So it's literally something like this, where you just literally have a towel and you're basically just scrunching with your toes and you kind of scrunch it up. You do like 10 or 20 reps and you're going through that motion where you're pulling it in. This can work out pretty well for that specific arch strength. I would sort of say when you're looking at this, the main key for the foot drills is making sure you just don't end up spending way too much time. You don't end up doing 20 different foot drills and just wasting all of this time, which I see a lot of people do. We want to keep it concise. We want to keep it like time efficient. So choose the then, if maybe you've tried some of that stuff, you've done it for like 4 to 6 weeks, and you still feel like you need more, I would sort of say at that stage, definitely see a podiatrist. Because again, you can go down the rabbit hole online and find a million different foot exercises, but it can be very, very easy just to get wrapped up in doing all this complicated stuff and spending a huge amount of time and attention doing this really, really fiddly, frustrating exercises. But maybe it's just not even working the right areas for you. The stuff I recommend here, it's all kind of catch-all. It's very, 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 I don't want to say generic, but it does cover a lot of bases. And for most people, it'll give you benefits. And even if it doesn't target your specific issue, it will improve other things which are going to be beneficial. Sometimes when we go down the route of other stuff, it can get a little bit tricky and a bit of time investment. So I know that's a long answer to a relatively short question, but that's kind of my thoughts on there. And I hope that helps. Right. And then last question, if nothing else comes through live, we're going to be talking a little bit about heart rate zones. And basically the question was, look, I find that when I'm hiking, my max heart rate is in the range of 140 and maybe gets up to like 140 to 150 plus. I usually climb hills and mountains with elevation about 600 to 700 meters. I don't get severe breathlessness with my current heart rate. Is this kind of heart rate within acceptable range? So yeah, when it comes down to heart rate stuff, a few bits and pieces goes into that. General rule of thumb when we're talking about heart rates and we're talking about a heart and this and that, if this is causing you concern, if you're a little bit worried about this, if this is kind of like playing in your head or whatever it may be, or if you do have a history or a family history of like cardiovascular issues or heart issues or conditions or anything like that, take this to your doctor. Go chat with them and just be like, hey, I'm a little bit worried about my heart rate, it's a little bit high. They'll have tests, they'll have assessments and look into it. And they'll be able to say, hey, this is perfectly fine. Or maybe there's other testing you need to do. So first rule of thumb, if it is worrying you out, or if you do have a history, take it to your doctor, have a chat there. Beyond that, say you've seen the doctor and they said, your heart rate's fine, whatever it may be, it's not that big a deal. Beyond that, then there's a few things that goes into it because heart rate, when we're looking at training and exercise, it can be a little bit of a tricky thing. And sometimes it can be hard to say whether we can put into the terms of acceptable or not. In the sense out there's a lot of general recommendations around heart rate for training and exercise. You've probably heard max heart rate, and the formula to use that is like 220 minus your age is your max heart rate. There's training zones where you look at your training zones and different levels of intensity for your exercise. You've probably heard of zone 2 training, maybe zone 3 or zone 4 or zone 5 or whatever it may be. If you've got a fitness tracker, it'll kind of tell you different bits and pieces and say, if you're working at this heart rate, you're targeting these things. And there's lots and lots of different formulas to kind of look at working that out. There's loads. Now, when it comes down to any of these formulas, the whole idea around this type of stuff is they are generally good formulas for the average population. They take everyone out there and they take 100% of people and say, if everyone used this, it'll be relatively accurate for the majority of people. However, there are definitely outliers. It's not 100% accurate to everyone. For example, for me, my max heart rate is technically 220 minus my age, whatever that is. I go out and do a high intensity interval training session. My heart rate gets way higher than that. Does that mean my heart's about to explode? No, it just means that the sort of heart rate, the maximal heart rate formula may not be 100% relevant for me. And then on top of that, that kind of throws my training zones out a little bit. And it sort of throws, like, if I used a generic formula, I would go out and do a training zone. It would sort of say, hey, Rowan, your heart rate is way too high for what you're doing, but it doesn't factor in the fact that my max heart rate's a little bit out of whack. So when it comes down to all of this sort of generic formulas, it can be a little bit tricky for some. As I said, medical side of things, chat with your doctor. They will give you targets. They can do your tests or whatever it may be. Exercise side of things, if you really, really, really wanted to know exactly where you're sort of fitting into things, the only way to really know is to go down and get a lab test. And you have to pay money and do his testing. Not really relevant for 99% of hikers. So yeah, when it comes down. So beyond all of that, at first glance, if you are in the situation where you're doing this, you seem relatively comfortable, you don't get super out of breath, then it's probably fine, in all honesty. Like, as long as it doesn't feel outrageously hard, as long as it doesn't feel outrageously difficult, even if the heart rate's getting up there, probably not a big deal. On the flip side, if you are like, hey, I'm not getting severe breathlessness, but it definitely isn't comfortable, I'm definitely getting tired, I'm definitely not feeling great, or I would like to improve this, then there are a couple of things you want to consider. Number one, the first place to look on regards to heart rate is if you develop your aerobic fitness. If you go through a training plan which improves your cardiovascular fitness, improves your aerobic capacity, you will help your body be more efficient and require a lower heart rate. One of the adaptations we get from training and from cardiovascular exercise is we improve what's called our stroke volume, meaning every single beat of our heart, we can actually pump out more blood. So therefore, if our heart can pump out more blood, it actually doesn't need to beat as many times to get the blood around the body. That's one of the adaptations of training. So basically, you can sort of say, hey, I want to improve this. I'm going to follow a cardiovascular training program. I'm going to get out and do a bit more hiking. I'm going to do some loader pack walking or some stair climbing or some cycling during the week and progress that over time. That can be really good. And you can use in this situation the heart rate to progress over time. You can sort of say, okay, my averages were here. Then you know what? Over the weeks, over the months, if I'm going on my hiking, my average is going down. That means the training's working. On top of that, if you are feeling not 100% comfortable, maybe it may be a case of actually practicing pacing on type of sections. So if you're like, you know what, actually, I'm getting these elevation bits and I don't get severe breathlessness, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe you can just practice going a little bit slower and sustaining that. So the breathing doesn't get quite as much, the heart rate doesn't get quite as much, and actually practice this because that is a learned skill. That is something we can develop, and it does take a little while, but definitely does go a long way. So ultimately, long answer short, if you are a little bit worried about it, see a doctor, have a chat, see what they have to say. Beyond that, if you just feel comfortable and it's just a higher number and you're not worried about medically, it's probably okay. If you are not comfortable and you want to improve it, cardiovascular training, follow a good training program, learn to pace and learn to control your intensity a little bit, it will go a long way. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives a little bit of context and hopefully that helps. So with that being said, that is everything that I've had sent through today. So yeah, with no questions come through live chat, I might wrap things up there. So for the future, if anyone does have any questions they would like me to cover on these streams, feel free to flick them over, let me know. And if anyone does have any follow-up questions of all of this, please let me know. But aside from that, I hope everyone's watching enjoys it. I hope everyone has a lovely day, and we'll talk to you very, very soon.